Go.
Greetings, this is Father Michael with our word for the week. In our gospel today, Jesus gives the ultimate one-liner. Repay to Caesar what is Caesar. Repay to God what is God's. It's the ultimate mic drop of the gospel. The Pharisees asked this thorny question, trying to entrap Jesus in his own words. And Jesus elides the whole question of taxes and Roman providence and governance in order to give a deep principle unveiling the relationship between our faith and how we interact as a community, what we might call the polis or politics. And there are three aspects to this principle which can be very helpful for us as we near the thick of election season, when we have a sense of perhaps trepidation, perhaps we feel pulled in and overwhelmed by that sense of often the kind of rancor that political discussion can bring. Jesus gives us words to live by, words which might give us equanimity, balance, and good perspective as we head into election season. What might these be? Well, first of all, we have to consider the context. The context of Jesus saying, repay to Caesar what is Caesar, repay to God what is God's, is this question posed by the disciples of the Pharisees. They ask, Teacher, is it lawful to pay the Roman tax? Here, they are specifically trying to entrap Jesus in order to present a kind of non-winnable situation. And here's the background. The background is Rome certainly has governance over the Jewish parts and places of that world, and they require a kind of tax. The person who would enforce this tax was actually Jewish himself, half Jewish, and that was the client, quote unquote, King Herod. And so Herod had a group of politicos that were close to him, kind of on Team Herod, and they were known as the Herodians. So even though the Pharisees and the Herodians do make for strange bedfellows, the Pharisees enlist their help to go to Jesus to basically say, is it lawful to pay the tax? They're hoping that Jesus is painted with a broad brush in order to be aligned politically with these Herodians, these politicos who have, in a sense, sold out to Roman occupation. They're kind of collaborators in the worst sort of way. And so the Pharisees' motivation is, in the midst of all this flattery of teacher, we know that you respect no opinion, you're your own man, you're full of wisdom and enlightenment, should we pay the tax? Is a question meant to marginalize or polarize the good news, the gospel of salvation. And Jesus' response is a kind of rebuke, calling out their hypocrisy. Today, in our own political conversation, it's filled oftentimes with so much foment, some rancor and bitterness. It's very difficult to have a harmonious or reasonable conversation about politics, whether they be left, right, middle, or anywhere in between. Oftentimes, we can paint with a broad brush what we think and our team, our politics, are the right way, and everyone else is not just wrong, but somehow evil, somehow morally reprobate in every way. Jesus' words to the Pharisees ring in our ears then, as he says to them that not only are they cutting themselves off from the truth by trying to entrap him, but they are also cutting others off by blinding them to the good news of the message. So Jesus' words are stinging rebuke to the Pharisees and to the Herodians equally. He then gives that line, repay to Caesar what is Caesar. And that's that second point. If the first is that during this election season, we have to have open hearts, the ability to listen to the other side, because make no mistake, the Pharisees failing wasn't that they disagreed with Jesus, but they were not open to be led to have that encounter. And they blocked that encounter with others. So the context lets us know that we, in our own political discussion, such as it is, need to have an openness and respect for all sides of the question, naming truth where it is there, but not shouting at error, but inviting it to come to the truth of the gospel. And leading then with that second aspect, to repay to Caesar what is Caesar's, Jesus is, in a way, implicitly calling us to be engaged politically, to be active in the political process of whatever the norm of the culture might be. For ourselves, we have inherited such a rich tradition: life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And though these are rights, we must always defend them. We might always fight for them. We must always stand up for them, lest they be lost. And so as Catholics, it's not enough for us to say, oh, politics are they're so dark, they're so difficult these days, I'm just going to absent myself from the process. We can't do that. We need to be engaged, each according to our vocation in that process. I think here of a great hero of mine, Pope John Paul II, and famously how he championed the solidarity movement in the midst of Soviet oppression of his home country, Poland. Now, make no mistake, he didn't advocate for a kind of theocracy, a kind of taking over of the church from the state, but he advocated that everyone, and especially Catholics, bring their voice to bear. And from this, and certainly a great wealth of tradition, has come to us of the tradition of Catholic social teaching, the moral teaching of the church, which gives us principles whereby we can engage in politics and in the social life, and in terms of the networks of political policy according to prudence. When someone asks me, Father Michael, what are your politics? And not often people ask, but when they do, I say, it's very clear to me. The Catholic social teaching of the church, that's my politics, right? That should be the politics of every Catholic, that we take our cues from the Lord, and then, as we are able, to prudentially work out what is the best, most effective way of bringing those principles to bear on our society. And this leads to that third implicit aspect of Jesus' words: to give to God what is God's. Faith must always take the first place in our hearts. Faith before politics, faith before any sense of political affiliation, that we are Catholics before we are Democrats. We are Catholics before we are Republicans. We're Catholics, frankly, before we are Americans. We are all sons and daughters of our Lord Jesus Christ. And that is our deepest sense of identity. And from that, certainly we might affiliate with different political parties or movements, but those must always take a kind of subsequent and relational role to the core of who we are. And this was brought to mind because recently, just about a few weeks ago, the Pew Research Center released a whole bunch of information, including a very provocative article entitled 8 Facts About Catholics and Politics in the United States. And they named a lot of facts which weren't surprising about the demographics of how Catholics vote. But point number 5 really struck me to the heart, and it was this. They discovered through polling and through their data that most Catholics vote according to political party affiliation rather than to their own Catholic sensibility and Catholic moral teaching. And this was striking to me. It means that Catholics see themselves more as Democrats or Republicans than they do as Catholics, as followers of our Lord Jesus Christ, specifically when it comes to particular issues surrounding moral life. Let me give the example. The Pew Research Center gave this example. They asked about abortion and how one affiliates as Democrat or Republican, and they discovered that 77% of people who identified as Democrats or Democratic leaning voted for politicians that were against the protection of life in its infant stages. They are pro-abortion, not in spite of this policy or platform, but because of this platform. This is deeply, deeply concerning to me. No doubt the Catholic Church does not endorse particular people for office, particular candidates, but proposes principles whereby we can apply them prudentially to any specific given case. But what is not debatable is one cannot vote for someone because of their anti-Catholic or anti-life position. One might vote for a Democrat, not because they support abortion, but in spite of that for other various reasons. But when someone comes to me and says, I'm voting for this or this candidate who's a Democrat because they support abortion, I frankly have to tell them, you're wrong. You are in danger of losing your immortal soul. You're in danger of cooperating. You are cooperating with evil in this regard. And as a priest, this can be very discouraging to know if this Pew Research Center facts are right, that literally over 3/4 of Catholics vote not based on Catholic moral teaching, but just because they're on Team Democrat or Team Republican. And certainly abortion is not the only sort of policy, but it is one of the main ones for sure. It concerns me because it lets me know that as a Catholic priest, as a Dominican, a preacher of the truth, I've somehow failed to propose the goodness of Catholic moral teaching. We haven't, as a church, promoted the goodness, the life it brings. And on the other hand, perhaps we have refrained from echoing Jesus's sharp rebuke of the Pharisees. To those who would rather vote as Republican or Democrat, regardless of what the church says, hear Jesus' word, you brood of vipers. Woe to you. You are imperiling your immortal soul by voting in this way. Bottom line, it's not easy to hear. It's frankly not easy to say, but it's necessary to say. Jesus himself says it, that at the end of the day, we are called to repay to God what is God's. We are called to enact principles according to our faith, not just because we're on one side or the other. We're called to have opening ears to respect one another, to be engaged politically, to put those Catholic principles into practice as we prudentially can, but at the end of the day, to know that we will be judged. We will be judged by a merciful God who will repay us to the extent that we have shown that same mercy. God bless you. Be at peace.